All right, fantastic. Welcome. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today in the Storage Leaders Virtual Panel. A theme for today's session is Future-Proofing Storage and Backup 2026 Trends, Threats, and Transformations. That's quite a big title. Welcome to today's session. Quick introduction. My name is Doron Youngerwood. I'm really excited to be your host today and to dive in to some of the hottest trends we've seen lately, like the growing role of AI in storage optimization, cloud complexities, the latest best practices for ransomware protection, the evolving regulatory landscape that's shaping how we secure our systems and our data. So whether you've come today because you're curious about AI or you want to know about the latest buzz in sustainability, we've got you covered. Over the next 45, 50 minutes or so, we'll hear from some of the leading voices in the industry and we'll share insights, best practices, and yes, maybe even a few anecdotes about the ever evolving landscape of storage and backup. So, whether you're a seasoned expert or simply starting out, there's going to be something here for everyone. I want to encourage everyone to please ask questions, use a Q&A panel. We will try to get to as many questions as possible throughout the session. So share your thoughts in the chat, and we want to make this session as interactive as possible. We're here to learn from each other and really make the most of the time together. A very, very quick word from our sponsor, Continuity, and their flagship solution, StorageGuard. With the rise in cybersecurity threats and regulatory pressures, StorageGuard is really the only solution that verifies and hardens the security configuration of all enterprise storage and backup environments, including the likes of Dell, NetApp, Pure, Rubrik, Keycity, etc. And in addition, it helps to ensure that these environments remain compliant with industry standards and regulatory requirements. So with that in mind, let's jump right in and get started. Welcome again to the virtual panel, and let me hand over to the panelists to introduce themselves. I'm going to ask David to go first, and then we'll do a round robin for all the other panelists.
Great. Thank you, Doron. So I am David Brown. Been doing storage for probably a couple decades now. Currently in a role it's actually one of those jobs that's fun to go to work, working for the state of Michigan. The role, it's constantly evolving and challenging, and I really enjoy being part of an organization serving the greater good of the community, public service. Prior to this, I actually, going way back, got started with information technology during my time in the military as a Unix operating systems administrator, which evolved into data protection, backup, and recovery, which then evolved into storage administration, storage engineering, storage architecting, and I've served in many a role from healthcare, financial institutions, automotive, and here back in government service. And the one thing I've discovered, despite all the changes of the business units, is the scope of the data and the critical nature of protecting it, whether it be healthcare, financial, government, or private sector. So with everything going on out there in the world, it's been great to get into these different environments while still supporting what I view as an always challenging, always changing, but always very rewarding of enterprise storage, data protection, cybersecurity, and of course, artificial intelligence.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. Naresh, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Naresh Kattel. I've been with the storage industry for about 20 years now. I've been, started as a storage administrator, worked my way through being a leader in managing storage, and then eventually going into storage engineering and integration. So my experience has been with my present firm, AllianceBernstein, mostly. That's where I've worked. And my experiences will be about some of the challenges we have had seen there. And thank you.
Fantastic. And Julian, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi, I'm Julian Topley. I work at Lloyds Banking Group. I've been there for almost 8 years. And before that, I was 17 years at Goldman Sachs with a brief stint in a startup where I was focusing on container storage. Essentially, I've worked on all things infrastructure engineering, operations, and storage over that period of time. But before all that, I actually qualified as an architect. So I guess I take a very sort of structured, design-led approach to breaking down problems and I guess visualizing problems, which is a sort of architect type thing to do. And where I work now, I'm a senior service manager for storage and backup. So that means I'm responsible for the platforms that store and protect data, make sure that the right data sits in the right technology, it's backed up, it's recoverable. We can keep services running or bring them back when things go wrong. And at the moment, we're in the middle of a big transformation program. So there's a lot of excitement around all things like AI and where we want to go to next. But a big part of what I do is also very pragmatic. So, getting changes over the line safely and making sure that the basics of resilience and recovery stay solid as we modernize our environment.
Great. And then Kevin, over to you.
Hello, my name's Kevin Battle. I currently work for Charter Communications, which the world knows as Spectrum Cable. I'm currently a data infrastructure engineer there, and I've been in this industry 20 plus years. I started out as a Windows admin, and then I forayed over into storage, and my first job in storage was with EMC, which is now Dell. So from there, I've worked with HP, Dell. I've also worked at some of the bigger banks like Wells Fargo, Bank of America, as a consultant. So it's just storage has done well. It's always been very interesting to me. I've served both as a FTE and a contractor. So I have it from both ends, just understanding what the customer and client needs are. So what's interesting to me now is AI and how it's changing the landscape of the storage industry and the new demands placed upon us. So I look forward to it.
Excellent. All right. Fantastic. Thank you for that introduction, gentlemen. Let's dive straight in. The first category is around industry trends. So let me start with David. What do you see as the single biggest disruptor in enterprise storage and backup today?
That's always a great question because it's going to have a differing of opinions regardless of the environment and business you're in. I remember back, if you would ask me this question 20 years ago, it would have been virtualization. One of the first SANs I ever put in was a whopping 5.5 terabytes. And at that time, we were just amazed and thought, we'll never outgrow this much capacity. And virtualization came along, and the next thing you knew, it exploded, and we were doubling, tripling almost every year. So the mirror is a great way to build our crystal ball. And through today's standard, obviously, as Kevin alluded to, and the part of the topic is the elephant in the room, artificial intelligence. There's other factors, of course, like the shift to hybrid cloud and the threat of cyber attacks and those trends there. But AI and machine learning is a rapid, fundamental force that it's requiring an entirely new approach to enterprise data storage. We have to look at how much data is coming in, how quickly it's expanding. We deal with multiple petabytes today, but I was in a meeting just 2 days ago where I had a customer for the first time throw out the yottabyte as a capacity planning trend. And it has to do with AI. It's a business unit for autonomous vehicles, and the way those vehicles talk to each other and share that information is just increasing that data tremendously. And then when we throw the cloud into the mix, you need the performance, but it has to be instantaneous. And storage is a foundational of that requirement. So intelligent storage management is going to go hand in hand with machine learning and data sets. They're just huge and complex. When we're talking about artificial intelligence for IT operations, we're automating, we're optimizing, we're looking at performance, and at the same time, we're trying to predict. And that's probably one of the most difficult things we've dealt with since virtualization and VMware and everything that goes along with that is just AI and prediction is today one of the biggest areas we're struggling because the higher you predict, the higher your cost. And the one thing, obviously, your finance department wants to avoid is overspending and underdelivering. So trying to align those two areas, the cost associated with AID and providing that infrastructure is, in my opinion, the biggest obstacle today.
Great. And Kevin, I want to ask you the same question. Do you agree with David? Do you think AI and specifically machine learning and leveraging AI for storage management, storage optimization, is that a big disruptor? What are your thoughts on in general?
Absolutely, I totally agree. And I'll just dig down a little bit more regarding performance demands. The new AI workloads requires more robust hardware. So there are new standards coming out like EDSF, FF, E3, which is there to replace PCI E in NVMe. So there there are a lot of things like SSDs. The capacities are everly increasing, and they're getting fast. But at the same time, it creates an issue of, well, the current issue now is when we use a lot of hardware, the carbon footprint is high demands on electricity. So the shift I'm seeing is these hard drives being more efficient, using less electricity, and that's what we need to adopt to.
Excellent. So Kevin, yeah, you talked about carbon footprint. I actually want to move on to the topic of sustainability. And maybe Naresh, you can answer this. Do you believe that sustainability is a real driver in storage decisions, or is it simply under the category of nice to have?
Well, I think it is a driver, and it's going to depend on the particular firm that you work at or are you're supporting, particularly because some firms have extra capacity and some firms don't, right? And it's really important that when you evaluate storage systems, that you take that into consideration. And a lot of times it's so easy to dismiss, what is the footprint and what kind of cooling and power and space I'm going to need. We take that decision very seriously. And it's our mission to make sure that it's as efficient as possible. It needs to be a decision that's always there every time you are about to go into a refresh cycle, or on a cycle of just adding as you go along. And I think even in the cloud, right? I think the more efficient a cloud provider is, the better rate they're going to be able to transfer to their clients. And I think it's going to be a forefront all the time, basically. It is like, storage is like in many environment about half of the infrastructure cost, right? So
Yeah.
it's a big lift for firm to not have to analyze that data. I think it needs to be there at all
Yeah,
times.
yeah, absolutely.
Naresh,
David,
could I chime in on that a little
yeah,
bit?
please.
Yeah, because I could not agree more with what Naresh was saying. It's sustainability at one point was considered a green feature, an add-on. That's not the case anymore. It's absolutely intertwined with the financial health and risk management of a modern enterprise. Storage has always been one of those areas that consumes a lot of floor space, a lot of power, a lot of energy, and a lot of cost. If what we are doing today is demonstrating energy and space efficiency, it's got to be on the table at all times in early parts of those conversations. In the environment that can deliver the same capacity and performance while consuming even 50% less power represents a massive and continuous operation expenditure saving. So having that ability to literally do more with less is huge in our enterprise environment.
Great. Moving on, David, you touched on virtualization a minute ago, and I want to ask Julian a question around if you believe that virtualization is evolving in your storage environments, and if so, how? Are you seeing perhaps new challenges, new opportunities with virtualized storage?
Yeah, I think we're seeing virtualization. Obviously, I remember virtualization when we met up with the founders from VMware many years ago when I was at Goldman, and we just thought this was quite a novel invention until we had a different problem, which was to do with power. And AMD came up with a multi a multi-core CPU. It's like, great, this is really power efficient, but we don't have any multi-threaded applications. And then all of a sudden, overnight, virtualization became this really big thing because we had something that could leverage it. It had meaning. And that's, virtualization is evolving, evolving from VMs as images on one hypervisor to services defined as code on resilient storage. Data on that resilient storage needs to persist regardless of the hypervisor or, for that matter, the container choice. And that's kind of the challenge, is that how are we looking at virtualization now? Are we looking at it as virtual machines? Or are we looking at containers? And I think part of that problem is that we need to look at how we can modernize those environments. So the real change is how we look at applications. So what's important is the data, not the virtual machines. Today, we treat virtual machines as important. The VMs, the VMDKs, if you're using VMware. The stateless parts, VMs, containers, services, need to be considered as infrastructure as code. I think in the future, we need to start really thinking about that. And then that really opens the door to thinking about virtualization and resilience now. So it kind of opens up the newer the opportunities. And the big shift is VMs aren't the things that we must protect anymore. We need to look at the application, and the rest is as stateless and managing that as code. And the hard work there is really breaking down or disaggregating your applications into separate components. What's persistent, what's disposable. And if you kind of break it down into, I guess, three sort of clear principles, you've got data becomes the unit of value. So once you've done that, you have this kind of the ability to move compute wherever you like, different hypervisors to containers to cloud, while still meeting all your resilience and compliance obligations. But data itself needs to be understood, protected, and well understood. The other thing is that the protection needs to be layered. So you need to think about, at this point, then you can think about things like snapshots, replication being frontline for fast recovery. And then you've got your backup and vaulting for the longer term, the last bastion, for where you can do all your recovery and forensics. And different pieces in that puzzle play different roles. And then I guess the last part is, as an emerging thing, is this idea of cyber storage, and also looking at how you're backing up your environment. So storage has to offer immutability, anomaly detection, be able to give you clean recovery points. Storage needs to be smart. The other thing is with backup, with VM-based API backups, we use those as accelerators, but they're not really the source of truth. So you have this kind of concept of just like with just having transaction logs forever, and at some point, if something breaks somewhere in the stack, you've got nothing to go back to. So you really need to start looking at how you baseline your trust. And this is hard enough for ordinary VMs, but if you then start thinking about how this fits into the databases, it becomes a lot more complex. But I think for me, the opportunity of all of this is to let infrastructure as a code describe everything, and then let the data and the storage quietly focus on protecting and presenting that to whatever virtualization you're looking at, as part of your strategy.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, one thing I want to add to this topic is, I think virtualization is allowing, even in the storage space, to granularize services. Meaning, instead of having larger buckets and servicing many clients, you can focus. You virtualize your services and you focus to specific clients, and that has a lot of advantages, right? Like you has a small blast radius from a ransomware perspective. You have more control in terms of how you permission that storage systems, especially if you think about it from an object or file share perspective. So it's the more virtual, as long as you're not crazily proliferating virtual presentations, the more you have virtualized, I think the better you will be in terms of protecting your environment as well. It's kind of a misnomer. Sometimes you think it's actually the other way around.
Excellent. Yeah, good point. So let's move on and talk a bit about backup as a service. And Naresh, what are you seeing around the adoption of backup as a service? What are the real pros and cons for organizations today, especially when we think about cost control and recovery readiness?
Yeah, as much as storage is evolving and the data is growing, the backup is becoming more and more challenging. Like you definitely need a core set of competencies to adequately manage your backup environment. And I'm not talking about production/DR. I'm talking about tertiary backups. You're protecting against that disaster that you never have to go, go and recover from, right? Like, so it's really important. I think backup as a service is going to continue to grow. You'll probably want to um, understand, what are the SLAs that these service providers are providing? Are they creating true independent backup silos from where your primary data is? These are the things that you have to understand. But it's one thing is that because of the complexity around backup as a service is going to be a very it's a very interesting topic to bring up, because you don't want to waste time and cycles backing up. Really, you want to give it to the experts. You want to basically, as much as you can, give it to the people that are doing this day in, day out. But there's going to be nuances, to understand, right? Like locality is going to be important. What are your SLAs for recovery is going to be important. How quickly can you get that restore done when you actually need it? So in my opinion, I think it's a booming service. There are multiple players that are coming online in that, and these players have scale. They're going to be able to give you actually probably better cost than you would get on your own, because of the size they're getting from these hyperscalers, right? So we're definitely looking at that as one of our prongs, right? To basically provide adequate service in that space. I think it's a exploding field.
Great. All right, wonderful. So that wraps up the first category or first theme around industry trends. I want to move on and talk about the second theme around security. So Julian, you touched on briefly the topic of cyber storage. So Julian, let me start with you. How are storage systems, backup systems adapting to the rise in ransomware attacks?
Um, I guess over the years, we've invested a lot in perimeter security, but the real vulnerability is in I guess what I'd say is the destination, the data. That's where people, as we know, that's where it's all going. So, the years of investment have made perimeter endpoint and identity controls much stronger, but there's a point of diminishing returns. It's just the perimeter is part of the journey, and the destination is the data. If you look at it like that, ransomware has effectively followed that value and now goes straight for the data, and increasingly backups as well. And the assumption now is moving away from if and more to when. And I think that's what we all really need to be thinking about is, don't rest on your laurels thinking that you've built the most secure perimeter. You need to expect that something may happen, and if it does, are you prepared? And when that happens, you discover the data plane, the storage layer, is where the reads, writes, and backups actually live. And that's kind of where you need to start thinking. And I think what we're beginning to see, and we mentioned cyber storage, is that we need to be able to contextualize these security events, not just send noise to our SIEM environments, and have the various rules that try and pick up and interpret this information, because they're not. Modern platforms need to adapt by treating data access as a security signal. So what we're beginning to see now are platforms that actually look at the behaviors and they learn. And they can infer that information back to SIEM, but at the same time, using ML and AI, they can react in real time and not human time, to protect the data. So they can take immutable snapshots. They can send all those warning signals. storage must react, as I say, at the kind of a machine speed. And you also need to be able to do other things like cut off suspect clients automatically, and then hand over to the humans to make the next steps. And this kind of fits into the whole NIST style incident response cycle. So prepare, detect, analyze, contain, recover, and improve. So it is how all that kind of fits into that cycle. And automated actions help contain the attack and protect clean copies for recovery. So that's really important. So it's the exam question for me is how can I narrow the gap between something looks odd and we've got a clean recovery copy to below human reaction time, and that's the thing that I think we really need to get onto. Logging is still important, as I mentioned earlier, for forensics, but it's not going to be enough if an incident were to occur. And it's not just ransomware attacks. I'm sure some of us at some point in our life have seen a housekeeping exercise where something went awry. An application team went and deleted a load of files, and I mean, thousands, unintentionally. And then it will take the storage team hours or days to recover. Whereas had you had cyber storage signals in place, a lot of that could have been contained and controlled, and the humans could have been alerted to then react to that.
Yep, absolutely. I want to direct that question to David and get your perspective on this, on what we can be, what are we doing, or how can we adapt to the rise in whether it's ransomware attacks or insider threats or simply other non-cyber related incidents.
Yeah, absolutely. And Julian brought up a lot of great points, and I couldn't agree more with the various attack vectors that could come in, intentional, unintentional, just failure to prepare. So ransomware, it's really changed the environment. Enterprise storage is historically was viewed as a data repository. The days of JBODs, just a bunch of disks. Then you brought in SAN and NAS and everything to protect that data. And it's evolved into a component of a company's actual cyber resilience strategy. Modern storage systems are no longer just focused on performance and capacity. They're being engineered for tamper-proof protection and rapid verified recovery. And of course, the clean areas to restore. One of the things if you are hit by a ransom attack, you need to have a place you can't just put it right back in the environment without a clean room to test it and make sure you're not reintroducing the very system that brought your environment down or is attacked. The other thing that seems to change back and forth is ransomware attacks used to be get in, launch your attack, get away. It evolved into the bad actors could sit in your environment 30, 60, 90, 120 days, become just a part of the background scenery, and then launch their attack. Now we're starting to see a little bit of a shift back to the get in, hit it, and get out quick. So real-time anomaly detection at the storage level is being introduced. If a storage system sees a sudden massive increase in the rate of file names, encryption, deletions, this behavior is not normal. What's going on? Well, hopefully an alert would be triggered. Getting the automated responses upon that detection, the system automatically, first thing it's going to do is trigger a snapshot. Hey, this isn't right. I'm going to protect my data. If something goes back, at least I have that recovery point. And it's taken the human element out of that. Your backups are great. Obviously, they're a defense in ransomware attacks, but they can also take, as Julian said, hours, days, weeks to recover from versus the clean environment and a location to send it to. And then the verification. Enterprise storage is introducing analytical tools embedded in the system. They scan the data copies. If you have a vaulted location, they make sure they're clean and free of whatever the malware or ransomware attack was to avoid that reinfection. So taking all that into consideration with, again, what Julian said is storage is now has a seat at the table with your cybersecurity team, your cloud providers, all the information to protect the data. And it's often viewed as, well, this is an extremely expensive cost to put this storage environment in place. Well, what's the cost to your business if you don't? And that's what we try to balance out. If you're down for 24 hours, you could be talking millions, if not billions of dollars, depending on the business unit you're operating in. So I think storage has definitely gone along with that and made a fundamental shift. And I don't want to say thanks to ransomware because I hate ransomware, but it's really brought upon the critical nature of what a solid investment in your enterprise storage environment can do for your business as a whole.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Let
It's
me just,
also worth
Julian,
mentioning that
you go next, and I want to
yeah, I was going to say it's a
pause.
sort of a kind of anecdotal thing is that what we've probably been seeing what we've been seeing over the last few months is this a change in what I describe as a code of conduct among attackers. So within the kind of the Eastern Europeans, they have a code where certain areas are off limits. So whether it's hospitals, children, even national infrastructure, it could be banking. Because they could have quite an impact on the people that may be harbored by their own governments. But what's changed more recently is with groups like Scattered Spider have been less interested in the money, but more around the boast about the achievement. And those are the kind of the more worrying changes that we're beginning to see in this area, and why we need to be a lot more on it with some of these capabilities and getting them into our operating models.
Yeah, I was reading a couple of weeks ago about the Agenda ransomware group, also known as Quillin. I believe that's how you pronounce it. And they have emerged as being, I think, one of the most prolific ransomware groups in 2025. I think since the beginning of this year, they've affected over 590 victims or companies around 58 countries. So very lucrative. And one of their strategies is to target backup infrastructure. They, in many cases, bypass production systems altogether and go straight after the backup systems. So, and another example I read about a week ago was Lynx ransomware. And at their recent attack, they managed to delete backups across their victim. They managed to access Veeam backup console. They reviewed the tape and the storage infrastructure. They managed to delete the backup jobs, the stored backups from the configuration database. And the list goes on. So yeah, it's certainly a lucrative area. And I want to pause and actually ask a question from the audience, from Steve. So Steve asked the following question. I'm just going to read it out. Are you seeing concerns around harvest now, decrypt later, due to the talk of PQC threats? Does anyone want to take a stab at that question?
So I'm not a cybersecurity person. That would certainly go to our team. We do have conversations with them. We're definitely seeing concerns around the harvest now, decrypt later. A lot of times they leave your data alone. They leave it on, I shouldn't say alone, they leave it on site with only the ability to decrypt it. You pay us in Bitcoin and we'll send you the keys to decrypt your data. Don't pay us and we'll make sure everybody knows that your system's been attacked and the data is encrypted and it's not coming back. So I think if I understand the question correctly, the harvest now is the sitting in the environment, gathering the information, decrypting it, and leaving you without the ability to unencrypt without paying the rent.
I think the key concern is more around the fact that people can obtain your data that's been encrypted, and one day we'll have a box that's got quantum capabilities that will be able to decrypt your data in a year or 2 years' time. And I think that the concerns that I'm beginning to hear in my environment around post-quantum cryptography and the uptake from vendors in being able to support that, and then us building standards around post-quantum cryptography and ensuring that all of our infrastructure is able to support that efficiently to avoid those sorts of eventualities happening. But I think there's this kind of, we feel that, it's okay, somebody stole the data, but it was encrypted, and you have to notify the regulators that the data went missing, but it was encrypted, everything's fine. And I think the worry now is that maybe it's not. And I think that's the kind of the grim reality is this unknown capability that might be coming around the corner.
Yeah, and I think Jody just asked a similar question. I've been seeing ransomware move from hostage-based encryption to injecting silent data corruption. And I think Julian and David, you more or less touched on that. It seems to be something that that we are seeing.
Absolutely.
Good. All right. Next question, David, let me ask you this as we've been talking about securing and hardening storage and backup systems. Do you believe that immutability and air-gapped backups are becoming table stakes now?
Absolutely. Both immutable backups, air-gapped backups, they've become table stakes for a true enterprise cyber resilient strategy. At one point, they were considered advanced features.
Mhm.
Today, they're becoming mandatory requirements for any modern data protection strategy. And it's really driven by the reality that ransomware attackers routinely target backup systems to eliminate the ability to recover without paying the ransom. Introducing the features of immutability and air gapping they're almost the last lines of defense when primary security layers, like what Julian touched on earlier, the firewalls, endpoint protection, et cetera, if those are breached or fail entirely, it's your backups and your air gapped environment that it's like a great insurance policy. You use it with the hope of you have it, you pay for it with the hope that you never have to use it. But when you need it, you're very glad it's there. The traditional backup rule of 3-2-1, 3 copies of data, 2 different media, with one of those copies being off-site, they're evolving. That's not enough anymore. Attackers can corrupt all those locations. So I work with our backup and recovery team, and some of the areas we talk about is we're actually looking at a 3-2-1-1-0 rule, which is where we're looking at 3 copies of our data, 2 different media types were available. 1 copy is stored offline, 1 copy is immutable or vaulted. And then we have to make sure when we're doing the recovery, the 0 errors after verification. So if we're going to restore that data, we want to make sure we're not restoring the exact data that took us out to begin with. So a threat actor gains the high level administrator access to the production environment. The air gap is one of those areas that you don't have access beyond that. We can't, if they get the credentials to log in, sometimes your own employees could be your greatest threat. Somebody's having an issue, they give away remote access. Well, the air gap now protects from outside threats, but sometimes even inside threats. So absolutely, it's become a table stake in immutability and air gapped. Yep.
And
I
on
would
that
say
topic,
there's
David, so Fred just asked a question in the Q&A panel. Does cloud written backups constitute air gap, assuming the cloud tenant is properly secure, encrypted, and immutable itself?
So in my opinion, no, they do not. And part of the reason for that is there's still access to the cloud. And as we've even seen in recent articles and news stories published, is the cloud's not a guarantee safe harbor for your data either. One area, one geographic area could go down, which can cascade to others. So even if it's not your business, you can be directly impacted by a customer whose data causes a DNS point to go down, thereby eliminating your ability. A true air gap solution is just that. Think of it as a drawbridge on the castle. You raise that up, there's no way to get in or out. You're there till that door is unlocked and opened, and it doesn't stay open. Part of the situation with the cloud is any data, anywhere, anytime access. Air gap doesn't do that. Air gap is your that access to that data is limited for a specific purpose. Get that data in, get that data out, whichever way it's flowing, and close it off. So I would say no, the cloud would not be considered an air gap, but could be people that disagree, but that's my opinion. No.
Okay, great.
that's
And
just that's going to add a couple of things. It's just
yeah,
I think it's all well and good that we have these vaults and they're kind of considered as the last bastion, the keep from where you can recover. But you really need to have a recovery strategy as well against that. And one of the things I'm seeing is that, we have a problem. We all have a problem with obesity, data obesity. And the difficulty is that you end up backing up a lot of stuff. And I was talking about it earlier with virtualization around composability and that we need to be able to back up and recover the data and be able to recompose the applications. And why is that important? It's important because if you have a cyber attack and you need to recover from your vault, well, your infrastructure is a crime scene. You can't recover to a crime scene. you have to have the capability to be able to recover somewhere else. So you need to have that flexibility. And I think we're all still learning about this. And the other thing is that, we look at the actual vault systems and we think, oh, well, this is the last bastion where, we've run out of money. We're going to put this on nearline SaaS. But the reality is when you want to recover, you need to get to a minimum viable product. So in banking, you've got to have a kind of minimum viable bank. So you've got to be able to recover key services. And well, the quicker you can do that, the more important it becomes. So, I think we're having to learn as well around things like data fabrics, as well as the actual storage substrate that we're putting all this on. And as I say, without the muscle memory, then you haven't really got a plan around the vault. The vault is just this artifact, a checkbox. It needs to be practiced.
Great. Naresh, a quick question around data sovereignty. So what challenges do you foresee with evolving data sovereignty laws?
Yeah, so I think every large enterprise are going to operate in different markets, and every market pretty much has a regulator, and these regulators are unleashed on you to make sure that you understand what those are. So I think there's got to be, this is a big topic, right? But I'm going to give you a very quick summary of what I think I'm seeing and needs to happen is you need to understand what your inventory is. You need to understand what those laws and how they are impacting each of those regions. And then, understand either it's data localization, data movement, all of those nuances to be able to effectively manage data. It's like, the complexity, it keeps increasing. We were talking about volume, then ransomware. Now we're talking about regulators, right? So it's become a challenge. And I think I'll leave it at that. It's very, you'll understand as you think about all the rules and regulations that are being created. It's just very complex. You
Yeah.
need to partner with your, enterprise, I would say, appropriate councils, so that, you understand it adequately.
Yeah, great. A question to Kevin. Do you believe that security teams should build deeper storage security expertise? And if so, how deep should that go?
Absolutely. Right now, everything is segmented. You have your separate security teams, you have your separate backup teams, you have your separate storage team. But with some of the new AI software, aware software, everyone has to coordinate and be aware. There are things like a lot of people, organizations put to the side, maybe like decommissions, for instance, right? These things are still haven't been fully decommed, as an example. They're still connected to the network. They're still connected to DNS, and these are also risk points that some people will overlook. But if you have the proper infrastructure in place, you just want to be aware of everything, even down to your service desk. That's one thing that I appreciate about StorageGuard software I've been working with for the last 3 years. It gets into the perimeter, inside the perimeter instead of the outside. So many things that we have tested, or many things that we have scanned, it didn't catch. Other tools did not catch the perimeter, the storage in the sand, and rightfully so, because those tools weren't designed for that. So I think with StorageGuard, and there will be some others emerging on the scene, this is very important.
Yeah. And Julian, let me ask you the same question from the perspective of security teams. You share Kevin's opinions. What kind of depth of knowledge and expertise do you believe security teams should have around securing storage and backup
So I
environments?
think security and storage must share the problem, but I think the key is not to blur the responsibility. So security services risk and storage operations change the reality. So the missing piece is this thread of context between them. So how can you contextualize what's wrong? And no, I would say that security specialists do not need to become storage engineers, but they do need to understand the context. So I had a chat with one of my CSO partners about this because I was trying to get a conversation going to try and understand this a bit better because we agree that it's not a simple problem to resolve. And we do, however, need experienced people to look at this and make the right calls. Security owns threat policy, escalation, all that kind of stuff. It's their role to say, these CVEs, these misconfigurations align to these business services. This organization risk is out of tolerance. We need to prioritize this. We need to deprioritize that. So they need to kind of make all the signals, and the storage and backup teams need to own those configuration responsibilities, the change, the fabrics, the protocols, all of that stuff that they understand, they have the knowledge in. The challenge is the volume and complexity of the context. You've got HRVs, MRVs, LRV, what all these three-letter acronyms, high, but also you've got things like NIST, CVEs, you've got ISO. There's all sorts of things that you've got to bring into this to add the context. And yeah, as Kevin was alluding, there are ways in which you can bring this knowledge into a central point for teams to then work on. But no single team can hold all of that in their heads. So we need to bridge that context. So we need to be able to continuously discover storage and backup systems. How are you going to do that? We need to be able to map configuration and firmware against the live vulnerabilities and good practice. So one CV might lead to a different problem to another. And then you've got to tie those findings back to real business services. So you've got to be able to prioritize and produce a clear prioritized queue of changes. But it's you need to build an operating model around it, and that's the real challenge. That you've got things like Storage Guard, which help add all of that context, but it's really the organization's responsibility to understand what that target operating model looks like. Because today we treat this as a very much as a one-off project. We get a PDF full of all this amazing stuff that we should be doing, and we go, right, let's get on with it. But it's an ongoing task. Someone has to own that threat scanning. Someone has to interpret those outputs. And you have to be empowered to respond within realistic maintenance windows as well. Be able to differentiate a vulnerability versus a 0-day vulnerability. And that's why the target operating model is such an important piece that we need to get our heads around. I'm not going to give you what that looks like or explain it, but I'm just saying that that's really kind of where the focus needs to land once you can build all that context.
Yeah. So moving away from security and talking about technology and innovation, we can't run a virtual panel without talking about AI. And we briefly mentioned AI, but let's try to understand, David, do we honestly believe that AI has the potential to, or is currently changing the way we manage and operate storage and backup environment? Is it hype or is it reality?
It's definitely reality. But the conversations I often have within my team and departments is AI, artificial intelligence, is such a broad term that you really need to shrink your scope a little bit and discuss what areas you're trying to focus on. If you just say, hey, we need to build an AI environment, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, what does your environment need? So it's absolutely doing it, but the areas that we're starting to look at is we're using artificial intelligence for IT operations. Does it help our customer support center, our security, and of course our backup and recovery, everything. For storage, I think I might have said this earlier, but AI in that environment it's really turning our storage systems into active participants in maintaining uptime and data security. We're trying to show value of the predictive maintenance that goes along with artificial intelligence around machine learning. We're looking at models that can continuously analyze just the vast amounts of data that's coming into our environment, the logs, the sensor settings, the balance of data, the tiering. In the enterprise storage, you tier your environment based on the data, and it could be time consuming. You'd have these various pools sitting out there all the way back to tape, to spinning disk, to all flash arrays with different costs associated with it. And we'd be writing scripts to, all right, this data hasn't been touched in X number of days, move it down to a lower cost tier of storage. We can send that back to the agency that's using it and save them something. Well, then when something changes and it's hit, it repopulates back into that tier 0 and goes into that. So AI is helping to take some of that away, where it's constantly analyzing the data, predicting when it might be needed, so it can stage it preemptively. Again, I go back to some other roles. If you're in a healthcare environment, you schedule a procedure, such and such patient is coming in 2 weeks from now. Well, AI can start grabbing that information, preparing it, presenting it to the health environment. So there's no guesswork as to what needs to be done and looking at it. AI has already said, you're looking at this, it ties into that, and it's all related to patient XYZ.
Yeah.
This is one of those questions where you could really go on for a long time, so I'm going to kind of stop right there. But absolutely, AI is it's changing the storage management, and I like to think for the better. It's taking some of that low-hanging area that is just time-consuming with the triage of data and the tiering, and putting that on the machine. It's still going to need people to validate, obviously, and make sure it's accurate. But as the machine learning continues to grow, so too does the benefit that AI can do for the storage environment.
Yeah. And Julian, can you wrap up in a couple of minutes? What your thoughts on that topic? I know it's a big topic, but do you
It
share
is quite.
David's opinion?
I mean, AI is real in storage when it behaves like a data control plane. So that's kind of what I'm seeing happening. It's a number of vendors are beginning to look at this, so giving data a purpose, elevating what drives insight, and helping us stop powering noise. I've talked about things like data obesity, for example, and really you need things like AI to be able to locate data. It needs to be able to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff. It needs to be able to help introduce role-based access controls. Think about things like lakehouse infrastructures, for example, but how people have access to different levels of that information, have different views, being able to do that all in real time. That's something that we're struggling with today. But I think with the advent of AI, the way we see storage is going to completely change things. And it's going to change the way applications behave as well. We're really going to have to start rethinking a lot of this. And a lot of that, as I say, starts at the control plane, where storage can add a kind of AI intelligence to understanding what that context is.
Yep. We're going to wrap up with a final question in the next few minutes. So I'm going to go around to each of you, the question for all of the panelists, very briefly. We'll call it the storage crystal ball. So everyone gets an option to answer this question. Naresh, you can go first. The question is, if you had to give one piece of advice to other storage leaders preparing for the next phase of storage in 2026, what would it be?
Well, I think the AI is a great place to start. Embrace what it can do for you, because I think we're going to be constrained budget-wise, in every way possible. And I think the more we can have AI look at our environment, and I don't say about specifically our proprietary data, I'm talking about metadata of how we manage and provision and consume storage, right? I think it's going to be very beneficial for those firms that look at it. And we're already doing that from a vendor perspective, but I think there's an aspect of some of this that you can build on yourself in-house, right? And basically use it to your advantage. I think that's one thing that I think everybody should look at. I also think that we didn't touched a lot about ransomware, and I think immutability of your data on all places, whether it's in primary data sets or in your vault, is going to go a long way from protecting against all these threats we have.
Yeah. And Kevin, same question to you. What is your crystal ball for 2026 and onwards?
Well, since data is doubling and tripling every 2 or 3 years, companies need to consider their infrastructure, and that's going to incur a cost. So there has to be a balance there. But forward thinking, hiring people that are AI aware on all levels and security levels would be very helpful. And that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah. And David, same question to you.
Sure. crystal ball questions are always fun but difficult to answer, so I don't tend to try because of the rate of change that happens. So to give a crystal ball answer, I always like to use the mirror on my desk. As I can't predict what's to come, but I can certainly see what has occurred in the past, and it kind of circles back to what I said earlier. The change VMware brought to the storage environment 2 decades ago, I foresee being AI already here and happening. The data is going to continue to grow. The more information that's out there, and like I mentioned, the fact that we're talking in yottabytes of data now for some of these organizations, that data's got to reside somewhere, and it's got to be balanced with the requirements of the data center to do so. So the crystal ball is you thought storage grew quickly over the last 10, 15 years. I'm anxiously curious to see what it's going to look like 20 years from now.
Yeah. And Julian, over to you. What's your piece of advice?
So what I was going to say is, so I think you need to be greedy for the right things. So you're going to be greedy for bandwidth, utilization, and guardrails, and use this cycle to build data fabric you can safely electrify later and not create a Frankenstein where you don't have those guardrails. He just gets up and starts running towards you, and you've got to bolt the door. The next phase of storage is going to change almost everything we do, as I said earlier. We're moving from a big transactional systems and reports to a world where AI assistants, agents, and real-time analytics are going to be pulling on the same data sets all at the same time. So that's going to be a new problem for us. So for me, the advice is, be greedy, but for the right things. And lay those foundations early. So be greedy for the bandwidth and proximity, design so the data can reach GPUs, CPUs quickly, so that hot data sets, indices, embeddings live close to the compute. And this all kind of fits into things like sustainability, but we won't go into that now. You've got to be greedy for the utilization, plan for architectures where expensive accelerators and licensing aren't just sitting there idle. As we know, GPUs and the licenses for those are extremely expensive. And you need to be greedy for guardrails, bake in catalogs, lineage, access controls, sovereignty rules, all of that. We need to really start thinking about that up front before we start going in and doing all this amazing AI stuff. And what that really means is building a well-governed data fabric, not just another round of point solutions that we've seen before. And, as I say, the Frankenstein warning is simply, if we just bolt AI and accelerators on and stitch it all together, history of platforms, we get something powerful, but it's very hard to control. And, I guess the crystal ball is to use this cycle to build a well-governed data fabric, one that turns watt hours and terabytes into useful outcomes, keeps your options open. Opens as patterns change, as we were talking with virtualization, and doesn't turn into a powerful, uncontrollable beast like like Shelley's monster.
Yeah, great last words, Julian. Thank you. And with that, thank you all our attendees for joining us. There's a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we couldn't get through all of them, but thank you for joining us. And of course, thank you for our phenomenal panelists, David Brown from State of Michigan, Naresh Kattel from AllianceBernstein, Julian Topley from Lloyds, and Kevin Battle from Charter. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. Amazing insights and thoughts. For everyone else, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.